Hello everyone, my name is Mary, and I would like to share my story about my difficult stepmother, Sara. I'll refer to her as Sara throughout because she never acted like a mother to me or showed any interest in being one. It all started when my dad, Isaac, introduced me to her. Sara made it clear, though not in front of my dad, that she didn't want me to think of her as my mother. She said, "I don't want you getting any ideas about me being your mother. You're just my husband's daughter and nothing more. You're a teenager, so don't expect me to go out of my way for you." I calmly responded to Sara, "That's okay, Sara. I can handle things on my own. All I want is for my dad to be happy." But she wasn't receptive and replied, "You're already in the way, you little witch. Don't try to be smart with me. I know how to deal with worthless teens like you. Once you turn 18, I'll make sure you're out of our lives for good. Then I'll have Isaac all to myself." The conversation escalated rapidly, with Sara hurling exceptionally hurtful remarks about me and my deceased mother. Then my father became a widower when I was just 8 years old, and I deeply miss my mother. It took my dad a long time to even consider dating again, let alone finding love. That's why I made the mistake of not telling my dad about Sara's horrible words and behavior. I should have spoken up because this woman turned into a nightmare after marrying my dad. Even my dad was taken aback by her behavior. Sara specifically targeted me and did everything she could to drive me out of the house. She made it clear that she despised children and didn't want me around, something she never disclosed to my dad before they started dating. When my dad refused to abandon me, she resorted to finding ways to harass me. One tactic she used was deliberately messing up her food and then blaming me for it. She would say things like, "Look at what your daughter has done, Isaac." She purposefully spoiled my cooking because I refused to cook for her. "She's going to poison me one day." In response, my dad would confront me, asking for an explanation. I would desperately assure him, "Dad, I swear I don't know anything about this. I'm perfectly capable of cooking for myself. I wasn't even in the house before you came home, and I had bought takeout to eat in my room." But Sara would continue lying, trying to manipulate my dad. I would plead with my dad, "Isaac, I'm telling you, you need to get rid of her before she harms me." This is just one small example of what Sara has been doing for the past 4 years. Sara remained a constant presence in my life, and the incident with the excessive salt was just one bizarre example where she tried to blame me for her own actions. However, my dad believed me, and I had enough evidence to support my innocence. Throughout the year, Sara did much more to make my life difficult. She would disconnect my phone calls, lock me out of the house for hours, take my car keys on important days, and even throw away a project I had worked on for a week. Her behavior was relentless. My dad did his best to make her understand that her actions were unacceptable, but she never listened. Sara would act friendly for a few days, only to repeat her cycle of doing something terrible. Eventually, after Sara had been with us for a year, I decided to get a job and started paying for many of my own expenses. I simply didn't want her interfering in my life any longer. Although my dad was upset, I assured him that having my own money would be beneficial for me, and I didn't want him to feel guilty. Sara, being a stay-at-home wife, considered my dad's money as her own and didn't want him to spend too much on me, not even on basic necessities. I tried to make myself as invisible as possible, hoping that Sara would leave me alone. However, she never took the hint and continued to harass me. She was determined to fulfill her promise of removing me from her life and the house, but little did she know what fate had in store for her. The real fiasco unfolded a few weeks after my 18th birthday. Since I had turned 18, Sara had been in a surprisingly good mood, chirping and singing gleefully around the house. I knew exactly why she was so happy. She believed that she would finally be able to get rid of me. However, Sara had no idea that I had overheard her conversation with a friend on the phone, where she revealed her plan to ambush and kick me out. While she thought she had the upper hand, she had no clue what awaited her. When I came home from work and saw my belongings packed and waiting in my bedroom, I wasn't upset. Instead, I was amused. I casually asked Sara, "Hey Sara, care to explain why my stuff is all packed up and ready? Are we going on vacation?" Sara responded with a smug attitude, saying, "Don't act so smart, Mary. I hope you remember what I told you. Once you turn 18, I'll be kicking you out." "Well, the time has come for you to leave. I've decided to be kind and pack your things for you, to make it easier." I calmly replied, "Oh, so you want to kick me out of my own house?" No, Sara. This is my house, and I don't want or need to stay here because of you." Sara had an overconfident smirk on her face, clearly pleased with herself. She had already started making plans in her head about what she would do with my room. But as I mentioned before Sara, things weren't going to go so smoothly for her. Karma was about to catch up. With composure, I took out some documents from my bag and handed them to Sara, revealing her surprise. As Sara sat down and started reading the papers, her confusion quickly transformed into shock and disbelief. She looked at me, then back at the papers in her hand, and then her expression turned to anger. She demanded, "Is this an eviction notice in my name? What the hell, Mary? What is the meaning of this?" I maintained my calm demeanor and replied, "It means that I want you out of my house in a month. The usual thing that an eviction notice implies." Sara grew even more furious. She exclaimed, "You can't serve me eviction papers. You can't do that. This is my house, and I'm the only one who can kick people out." I confidently responded, "Actually, Sara, this is my house, and it has always been. My dad was simply a caretaker who held this place for me until I turned 18. Now that I have reached that milestone, the house belongs to me. I have recently completed all the necessary documentation." Sara protested, No, that's impossible. Isaac can't just give you this house. It's our marital asset, and he can't give you the house without consulting me." I calmly retorted, "Well, Sara, you should have been more careful with your assumptions. As it turns out, my dad had the legal right to transfer ownership of the house to me, and he did so willingly. You have no legal claim to it." The realization of her precarious situation began to sink in for Sara. Sara's disbelief and denial reached new heights as I explained the true ownership of the house. I informed her that this house actually belonged to my maternal grandparents, who had specifically left it to me. My dad was entrusted with holding the house until I reached 18, which I recently did. Sara struggled to accept this reality, insisting that I was lying and attempting to scam her and kick her out. In a desperate attempt to regain control of the situation, Sara made the ill-advised decision to call my father downstairs. She seemed to have forgotten the fact that she never sought my dad's permission to evict me. Even if the house did belong to him, she should have asked him first. But in her frenzy, she disregarded this crucial detail and involved my dad without his knowledge. I was not complaining though. In fact, it worked out even better for me. As Dad came downstairs to assess the commotion, he was taken aback by Sara's furious outburst. He asked her to calm down and inquired about the situation, saying, "Whoa, calm down, Sara. Why are you yelling like a banshee? What's going on?" Sara, still seething with anger, replied, "Why wouldn't I be screaming? Your worthless daughter is making some wild claims again. She's saying that this house belongs to her and that she's kicking me out." Dad turned to me, clearly perplexed, and asked, "Mary, what is going on? I need to know the truth." I took a deep breath, ready to provide the whole story and the evidence to support my claims. I watched as my dad, true to his nature, sought to understand both sides of the story. He knew that Sara could be difficult and wanted to ensure fairness by considering all perspectives. Sara, on the other hand, despised this approach. She desired my dad to automatically take her side, regardless of right or wrong. Countless fights between them had revolved around this very issue. Nevertheless, my dad remained committed to being fair to all of us, which is why he asked for my side as well. Taking a deep breath, I explained to my dad. Sara called me down and informed me that she was kicking me out. She basically said that she didn't want to allow me to stay in her house anymore. I overheard her speaking to someone on the phone, discussing her plans. So, in response, I decided to take action first and served her an eviction notice. Dad's eyes widened in disbelief as he turned his attention to Sara. He thundered, "What the hell, Sara? Who gave you permission to try and kick my daughter out? You never discussed this with me. What is going on? Why am I hearing about this now?" Sara realized she had made a grave mistake. In her overwhelmed state, the shock of the eviction notice had momentarily caused her to forget about getting caught. I could see panic flash across her face before she assumed her usual defensive and hostile stance. She retorted, "Your daughter is already an adult, Isaac. She turned 18, and we've let her stay in the house rent-free for a month already. Most parents kick their kids out once they reach that age. We need to make Mary learn to live on her own and become responsible." Dad firmly responded, "That's for me to decide, Sara. You are not and never were her parent. You didn't contribute to anything related to Mary. How did you think it was okay for you to make such a decision?" The tension in the room escalated as my dad confronted Sara, demanding an explanation for her actions. As Sara continued to push for my eviction, she accused my dad of being unfair and favoring me all these years. She claimed that now that I was no longer a teenager, it was time to kick me out, emphasizing that she wouldn't allow me to stay in her house anymore. Dad responded with a hint of frustration. "Who said this is your house? Which deed shows that this house is in your name?" "Well, it's your place, so I have equal rights to it since I am your wife. So, this is my house too. I won't allow Mary here anymore." I couldn't help but interject, determined to set the record straight. "This is not my house, and even if it was, you have no right to it. This is Mary's house, and it has her name on it." Sara's face turned pale upon hearing my dad echo my words, stating that the house belonged to me. She had been living in her own self-created fantasy world where everything belonged to her simply because she said so. The reality of the situation seemed shocking and surprising to her. Overwhelmed, she began to cry and asked, "Why would you say such a thing, Isaac?" Dad replied firmly, "Because the house belongs to Mary. I'm just speaking the truth. What's wrong with that? You gave Mary your house without consulting me. How could you do this, Isaac? I'm your wife. You should have discussed this with me. I am not okay with this." I couldn't help but interject once more, pointing out the double standards Sara had displayed in her actions. "You had no problem going behind my back and trying to kick my daughter out. Why can't I do the same?" "Sara, let's talk about double standards here." Dad chimed in, emphasizing the truth of the matter. And there was nothing to discuss. This house was always supposed to be Mary's. I was the only trustee who took care of the house. The room fell into a tense silence as Sara realized her assumptions and actions had been completely misguided. As the truth sank in, Sara finally understood that the house had been transferred to my name upon turning 18. Dad, sensing her disbelief, offered to show her the papers as proof. However, Sara was too shocked to respond coherently. She accused my dad of deceiving her, claiming that she thought the house belonged to him all along. She expressed her frustration, saying it wasn't fair. Dad calmly responded, "I never lied to you, Sara. You never asked whose house this was. When we got married, we signed a prenup stating that our personal assets remained personal." "Oh my God, this can't be true. You should have told me, Isaac. Now Mary is throwing us out. Look at how ungrateful your daughter is." I intervened, correcting Sara's misconception. "Sara, I am not throwing my dad out. That consequence is solely yours. It's you who won't get to live in my house anymore. I would have considered letting you stay here, as I told Dad. But after you tried to kick me out, I changed my mind. You are going to leave. If you kick me out, your dad will follow as well. We are a couple, and he won't abandon his wife." Unexpectedly, my dad burst into laughter. He had been contemplating his own plans, unsure of whether to proceed with them or not. However, today's events seemed to have made the decision easier for him. He said, "Actually, no, I am not following you, Sara. I will stay here and take care of my daughter. I have been on the fence about divorce for a while now, and what you tried to do today sealed the deal for me." Sara was caught completely off guard as my dad revealed his intentions to end their marriage. She hadn't seen it coming at all. I listened attentively as my father revealed his decision to file for divorce the next day. Sara was taken aback, unable to comprehend that my dad would leave her over his daughter. She protested, insisting that he couldn't do that. Dad responded firmly, "Sara, you think I was going to forgive you for tormenting my daughter for 3 years? Oh, hell no. All this while, I thought you might change. I have been nothing but patient with you. But now I know that you will continue to be a toxic presence. I don't want someone like this in my or my daughter's life." Sara recoiled as if physically wounded. She never expected her divorce to come so soon. My dad, a generally quiet man who avoided drastic actions, was now expressing his anger. Though he didn't raise his voice, his tone conveyed his deep anger, leaving Sara even more anxious. They continued to argue, and I decided it was best to retreat to my room. For an hour, the sound of Sara's shouting and crying echoed through the house as my dad calmly explained his reasons to her. Eventually, the verbal fight came to an end, and my father came to my room. He seemed a little upset and avoided making eye contact with me. He sat down and said, "Mary, I know I need to apologize to you. I'm sorry, dear. I should have done a better job of protecting you against Sara. I thought that by being fair and avoiding fights, I would be able to make things work. I was stupid, and I made things worse for you." I reassured him, "You don't have to apologize, Dad. I know you love Sara, and she wasn't like this when she married you. People change, and sometimes it takes time to come to terms with these changes." He smiled at me, acknowledging my maturity. "Wow, you have matured a lot. You know, I wish I could have done things differently. I intentionally brought a mad woman into our lives. I reached out and placed my hand on his. We all make mistakes, Dad. What's important now is that we move forward and ensure a better future for ourselves." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the situation still heavy in the air. But amidst the turmoil, there was a glimmer of hope for a brighter tomorrow. Surprisingly affectionate, Sara's sudden change in behavior caught me off guard, considering her previous actions and the impending divorce. However, I remained cautious and observed her actions without fully letting my guard down. As Sara served me breakfast, she tried to engage in a friendly conversation, asking about my plans for the day and expressing concern for my well-being. I responded politely but kept my responses brief, maintaining a certain distance. I couldn't easily forget the pain she had caused me over the years. Despite her efforts, I couldn't bring myself to fully trust Sara's sudden display of affection. It seemed too calculated, as if she was trying to salvage something amidst the impending divorce. I knew that her true intentions were not genuine, and I refused to be swayed by her manipulative tactics. Throughout the day, Sara continued her attempts to win me over, showering me with compliments and small gestures of kindness. But deep down, I knew that her actions were merely a facade. I remained distant, refusing to let her false charm affect me. Meanwhile, my father and Sara continued their divorce proceedings. It was a difficult and emotionally draining process, but my dad remained resolute in his decision. He was determined to separate from Sara, recognizing that staying with her would only bring more pain and toxicity into our lives. As the divorce progressed, Sara's true colors began to surface once again. She grew more desperate and hostile, making false accusations against my dad and trying to manipulate the situation in her favor. But my dad remained strong, supported by his determination to protect me and build a better life for us. Finally, the divorce was finalized, and Sara was officially out of our lives. It was a bittersweet moment, as we felt a sense of relief, but also acknowledged the pain and turmoil we had endured. My dad and I embraced the newfound freedom, focusing on healing and rebuilding our lives without Sara's toxic presence. After the peaceful night's sleep, I woke up to find Sara in the kitchen, putting on an act of love and care towards me. She prepared breakfast and acted as if I was the most important person in her life. Even my dad seemed skeptical, giving her side-eye glances and looking at me with confusion. "You should have done this years ago. It's too late now," I told her firmly, not buying into her attempts at redemption. Sara tried to convince me that she would be a better parent and that we could be the best mother-daughter duo, but I wasn't swayed. I glanced at my dad, who seemed amused by Sara's desperate attempts. He had no intention of trusting her again. Sara had spent the night coming up with a plan, but I had learned not to trust her presence in my life. "I don't think so, Sara," I responded, my voice firm. "First of all, I'm 18 and don't need a new parent. I pay my own bills and will be off to college soon. Secondly, you are and never will be my mother. That word doesn't suit you at all. So, no, Sara, I'm not interested in whatever scheme you've come up with. Dad says you'll be out of our lives in a few months. If you're trying to strengthen something just to stay in this house, I'm sorry to say it won't work. I'm kicking you out," I asserted, making it clear that her presence was no longer welcome. Sara's face contorted with anger, disappointment, and desperation. She realized that her attempts to win me over had failed, and the consequences of her actions were catching up with her. I felt a mix of satisfaction and relief knowing that I had stood my ground and asserted my boundaries. With Sara's departure imminent, I felt a renewed sense of peace and hope. The toxic chapter of our lives was finally coming to an end, and I knew that brighter days lay ahead for my dad and me. We would rebuild our lives, free from Sara's manipulations, and create a healthier and happier future together. Anyway, I made it clear to Sara that I was going to divorce her. The damage had already been done, and there was no point in her trying to act innocent or remorseful. I knew her true nature too well. Sara realized her new strategy wasn't working. She didn't have any more ammunition to threaten my dad financially due to the prenup she had signed. So, her only option was to beg and cry. She started crying hysterically and pleaded with me not to kick her out. She even begged me to ask my dad for another chance. She continued her desperate pleas with my dad, begging him to be more forgiving. Our entire day was filled with Sara's attempts to beg and plead for mercy. Since both my dad and I were off from work that day, we had to endure this torture. However, my dad did leave for a while to contact his lawyer and file for divorce. Within a week, Sara received the divorce papers. Sara made some trouble when we told her to leave, but my dad threatened her with legal repercussions, and she eventually left. It has been more than 2 years since the incident. I am now in college, which happens to be close to home. My dad has successfully divorced Sara and is back to dating. As for Sara, the last I heard, she moved into a flat with several roommates and is struggling to make ends meet due to her lack of qualifications. I saw her from afar at a grocery store and she looked like she had aged 10 years. Karma had caught up with her, and hopefully, it taught her a lesson never to try something like this again. I hope you guys enjoy our video. To watch more interesting stories, subscribe to our channel. Thank you.